I am Geraldine, 32 years old, and a first-generation American. That warm summer evening was supposed to be a celebration, but instead it became the moment that changed everything between my parents and me forever. After years of trying to please them, of shrinking myself to fit their expectations, one cruel comment at the dinner table finally broke the dam. When they said they wished I was never born, something inside me snapped. I stood tall, found my voice, and said words that left the entire room frozen in shock. Before I share how my life completely transformed after that dinner, let me know where you are watching from. And subscribe if you want more stories about finding your voice when everyone expects you to stay silent. My parents arrived in America with nothing but 2 suitcases and enormous dreams. My father Carlos came from Mexico at 19, and my mother Lucia followed a year later. They met working double shifts at the same restaurant in Arizona, saving every penny for what they called the real American dream for their future children. They believed success in America meant becoming a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. Anything less was failure. By the time I was born, they had established a small but stable life. My brother Gabriel arrived 2 years before me, and from day one, the expectations were crystal clear. Excellence was the minimum standard in our household. B's were treated like failures, and achievements were never celebrated, just acknowledged as what was expected. You got an A on your math test. Good. Next time, study more for spelling, my mother would say, barely looking up from her cooking. My earliest memories involve sitting at our kitchen table surrounded by workbooks while other kindergartners were playing outside. My parents had created a rigorous after-school curriculum for us. Gabriel adapted well to this pressure, seeming to thrive on their approval. I struggled more not with the academic work, but with the constant feeling that my best was never quite enough. In 3rd grade, I won first place in the school science fair with a project about butterfly metamorphosis. My teacher made a big deal about it, even getting it featured in the local newspaper. When I proudly showed the article to my parents, my father glanced at it and said, "Science is good. You should focus more on this instead of always drawing in your notebooks." That was their approach to parenting. Accomplishments were stepping stones to greater expectations, never moments to celebrate in themselves. Every achievement came with an immediate pivot to what needed improvement. Gabriel was the golden child from the beginning. His natural inclination toward mathematics and science aligned perfectly with my parents' vision for success. When he brought home perfect report cards, my parents would nod approvingly. When I brought home the same, they would ask why I had only satisfactory marks in conduct instead of excellent. Gabriel sits still and listens. "Why do your teachers always say you talk too much?" my mother would ask, comparing us directly. By middle school, I had internalized their expectations so deeply that I became my own harshest critic. I stayed up late studying, joined every academic club, and pushed myself to exhaustion, trying to earn the approval that always seemed just out of reach. I developed severe test anxiety, sometimes making myself physically ill before exams, despite always performing well. The first major rift occurred in my sophomore year of high school. My art teacher, Miss Sullivan, recognized something in my work and encouraged me to apply to a prestigious summer art program. When I was accepted with a scholarship, I was ecstatic. For once, I felt seen for something I genuinely loved. When I shared the news at dinner, my father put down his fork and stared at me. "Art. What good is art? This is a distraction from your studies. You will not go." I tried reasoning with them, explaining that the program looked great on college applications, that many participants went on to top universities, but my mother shook her head. "College is for studying medicine or law, not drawing pictures. Gabriel is already preparing for pre-med. Why must you always be different?" That night, I cried silently in my room, feeling the first real pangs of understanding that my happiness and my parents' approval might be mutually exclusive paths. I went to the summer program anyway, telling them it was a general academic camp. It was the first time I had ever deceived them, and though it filled me with guilt, those 6 weeks became the most formative of my young life. When college applications came around, I applied to top schools for both pre-med and design programs. When acceptance letters arrived, including one from Rhode Island School of Design with a substantial scholarship, I faced the hardest decision of my life. My parents had already cleared a space on the wall for my medical school diploma. The disappointment on their faces when I announced my decision to study graphic design was something I will never forget. "We did not come to this country for you to waste your potential," my father said, walking away from the dinner table. For 3 weeks, my mother barely spoke to me. Gabriel, already thriving in his pre-med program, became the sole focus of their attention and pride. When I left for college that fall, my father drove me silently to the airport, offering only a stiff hug and a reminder to at least graduate with honors since you chose this path. Throughout college, I excelled. I made the dean list every semester, won design competitions, and secured prestigious internships. But each accomplishment was met with the same response from home. "That is nice, but when will you apply to graduate school for something serious?" The years of conditional love and impossible standards left me with crippling anxiety and perfectionism that followed me into adulthood. Every project, every deadline, every relationship was approached with the same fear. If I was not perfect, I was nothing. Being enough just as I was seemed an impossible concept. After graduating summa cum laude from design school, I declined a safe job offer in Arizona near my parents in favor of a risky but exciting entry-level position at a boutique design agency in New York. My parents' reaction was predictable disappointment, but I was determined to build my life on my own terms. Those first years in New York were a mix of exhilarating freedom and punishing work schedules. My tiny apartment in Brooklyn could barely fit a bed and desk, but it was mine. I worked 60-hour weeks, taking on freelance projects on weekends to make rent and build my portfolio. Each time I called home, the conversation inevitably turned to when I would get serious about my future. "Your cousin Anna just started medical residency," my mother would mention casually, "and she already bought a house." I did not tell them about the ramen dinners or the nights I cried from exhaustion. I also did not tell them about the small victories, the clients who loved my work, or the growing confidence I felt in my abilities. They would not have understood. Everything changed when I met Jennifer, the creative director at a mid-size agency, who took me under her wing after seeing my portfolio at a design conference. She was 50, accomplished, and completely unapologetic about her career choices. The first time she praised my work without adding a critique, I nearly cried. "You have a unique perspective, Geraldine," she told me over coffee. "Stop trying to make your work perfect and start making it authentic." Jennifer became the mentor and support system I had never had. She pushed me creatively, celebrated my wins without condition, and most importantly, showed me what healthy encouragement looked like. She introduced me to her network, recommended me for projects beyond my experience level, and stood by me when I inevitably made mistakes. "Failure is data," she would say. "Collect it and move forward." It was at one of Jennifer's dinner parties that I met David, a writer for a major publication who saw the world in words the way I saw it in images. Our connection was immediate and deep. For the first time, I experienced what it felt like to be fully seen and accepted. David listened to stories about my childhood with growing concern. "Geraldine, that is not high expectations," he said gently. After I shared a particularly painful memory, "That is emotional abuse." I dismissed his concern at first, defending my parents as strict but well-intentioned. But as our relationship deepened over the next 2 years, I began to see my family dynamics through his eyes, and through therapy sessions, I finally gathered the courage to attend. When David and I decided to move in together, my parents' reaction was severe. They saw it as not just a rejection of their values, but a personal failing as parents. My mother cried over the phone about the shame I was bringing to the family by living in sin. My father sent a long email detailing every sacrifice they had made for me and how I was repaying them with disrespect. Despite this tension, my career began to flourish. At 27, I won a major industry award for a campaign I designed for a nonprofit organization. It was featured in several design publications, and I was invited to speak at conferences. When the news broke, Jennifer threw a surprise celebration party. David wrote me a beautiful card saying how proud he was. My parents, when I called to share the news, responded with, "That is nice, but you know it is just drawing pictures. Gabriel just published his first medical research paper." That evening, something broke between David and me. He could not understand why I still sought approval from people who seemed incapable of giving it. We had our first serious fight, with him pushing me to establish firmer boundaries with my parents. "Why do you keep going back for more hurt?" he asked, frustrated by my tears. "At some point, you have to protect yourself." The strain on our relationship grew over the next few months. My anxiety worsened as I felt caught between the loving, supportive relationship I was building and the parental approval I still desperately craved. Eventually, David and I agreed to take a break that turned into a permanent separation. Another dream sacrificed on the altar of my family's expectations. The breakup pushed me into a deep depression. I finally committed to weekly therapy sessions where I began unpacking the patterns of emotional abuse that had shaped my life. My therapist, Dr. Richardson, helped me recognize that my parents' love had always been conditional, based on achievement rather than simply existing as their child. The child should not have to earn the parent's love, she told me during one particularly difficult session. That is a fundamental reversal of how parent-child relationships should work. Over the next 2 years, I worked intensively on setting boundaries with my parents. I limited calls to once a week, then once every 2 weeks. I stopped sharing details about my career that they could criticize. I practiced not arguing when they made dismissive comments, simply acknowledging their opinion and moving on. I learned phrases like, "I will consider that," and "that is one way to look at it," to replace my defensive justifications. The distance helped me grow stronger, but the core wound remained unhealed. Each interaction left me emotionally drained, fighting against the ingrained desire to finally earn their approval while simultaneously trying to break free from needing it. It was an exhausting tightrope walk between maintaining some family connection and protecting my fragile sense of self-worth. By the time I turned 30, I had established a successful career, rebuilt a fulfilling social life, and developed healthier relationship patterns. But conversations with my parents remained a source of anxiety and pain. I had learned to manage the relationship, but I had not truly healed from its fundamental brokenness. When the embossed invitation to my parents' 35th wedding anniversary celebration arrived in my mailbox, I felt the familiar knot form in my stomach. 3 years had passed since I had been home for more than a brief Christmas visit. While our relationship had stabilized into a distant but civil connection, the prospect of a full family gathering filled me with dread. I brought the invitation to my next therapy session with Dr. Richardson. "What do you want to do?" she asked, after I spent 20 minutes listing all the reasons I should and should not attend. "I want to be the kind of daughter who can celebrate her parents' marriage without anxiety," I admitted. "I want to be normal." "Normal is relative," she said with a gentle smile. "But if you choose to go, let us work on setting some boundaries that will help you feel safe." Together we developed strategies. I would book a hotel instead of staying at their house. I would limit my visit to 2 days instead of the full week my mother had requested. I would prepare neutral topics of conversation and practice exit strategies for uncomfortable moments. And most importantly, I would set an intention to remain grounded in my own worth, regardless of any comments or criticisms. "Remember," Dr. Richardson said as our session ended, "you are choosing to attend as an adult. You have the power to engage or disengage as needed." In the weeks leading up to the trip, I obsessed over finding the perfect anniversary gift. I finally commissioned a handmade silver photo frame from an artisan I had worked with professionally and had it engraved with their wedding date and a simple message, 35 years of family. It cost nearly $1,000, an extravagance I could barely afford, but felt necessary to avoid criticism. I spent almost as much time selecting my outfit, nothing too flashy or creative that might prompt comments about my artistic temperament, nothing too casual that could be seen as disrespectful, nothing too formal that might seem like I was trying too hard. I finally settled on a conservative navy blue dress that concealed my 2 small tattoos and looked professional without being showy. When my flight landed in Arizona, the desert heat hit me like a physical reminder of all I had left behind. I picked up my rental car and checked into my hotel, taking an extra 30 minutes to touch up my makeup and hair before driving to my parents' house. With each mile, I rehearsed my therapist's advice. Stay present. Remember your boundaries. You are an adult visiting other adults. My mother's critical assessment began the moment she opened the door. "Geraldine, you look tired, and you have lost weight. Are you eating?" No hello, no hug, just immediate evaluation. My father was more reserved, offering a stiff embrace before returning to the television while I helped my mother in the kitchen. Within minutes, she had managed to mention Gabriel 3 times, including updates on his prestigious research position and his wife Mariah's pregnancy. "Your brother will make us grandparents by Christmas," she said, the implication hanging heavy in the air. "At your age, I already had both of you." I took a deep breath and used one of my practiced responses. "I am happy for Gabriel and Mariah. That is wonderful news." My parents' modest home had been transformed for the anniversary party. The living room furniture had been rearranged to accommodate extra seating, and the dining room table had been extended with rental pieces to seat 16 people. My mother had spent days cooking traditional Mexican dishes alongside American favorites to please all the guests. By 6 o'clock, the house began filling with relatives. Tia Claudia and Tio Miguel arrived first with their 3 children, all of whom had professional careers my mother made sure to mention repeatedly during introductions. Lucia Jr., a pharmacist. Antonio, finishing law school. Carmen already accepted to a doctoral program at 23. And Geraldine designs advertisements in New York, my mother added, with noticeably less enthusiasm. My father's siblings arrived next, including my favorite Aunt Teresa, who had always shown genuine interest in my life and career. She hugged me warmly and whispered, "I saw your work for that big cosmetics campaign. It was beautiful." Her small kindness nearly brought me to tears. As more relatives filled the house, the volume of conversations increased along with my anxiety. Each interaction seemed to include some version of the same questions. "Still just doing graphic design? Not married yet? No children on the way?" I had just escaped an uncomfortable conversation with my cousin Javier about freezing my eggs before it is too late when Gabriel and Mariah arrived to universal adoration. My mother practically glowed as she led Mariah, visibly pregnant, to the most comfortable chair in the living room. Gabriel, handsome in his tailored suit, worked the room with the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the family hierarchy. To my surprise, when he reached me, his hug was genuine and warm. "I have missed you, little sister," he said, holding me at arm's length. "New York must agree with you. You look great." For a moment, I glimpsed the brother I had been close to as a child before parental expectations had carved separate paths for us. But the moment was brief, interrupted by my mother calling everyone to take their seats for dinner. The seating arrangement was telling. My parents at either end of the long table, Gabriel and Mariah in places of honor near my father. Me placed between elderly Tio Ramon, who was hard of hearing, and teenage cousin Sophia, who spent most of dinner texting under the table. As platters of food circulated, I felt myself tightening like a spring, hyper-aware of every glance, every comment that might contain hidden criticism. I carefully monitored my posture, my table manners, the amount of food on my plate, all the while maintaining a pleasant expression that made my face ache. The anniversary celebration was underway, and I was already exhausted from the performance. The dining room glowed with soft light from the antique chandelier my father had restored years ago. Crystal glasses sparkled beside fine china plates my mother only used for special occasions. The table setting was a physical representation of the image my parents had always worked to maintain, beautiful but delicate, ready to shatter at the slightest misstep. My father stood to offer the first toast of the evening, crystal glass raised high. 35 years ago, I married the most beautiful, hard-working woman in Arizona, he began, smiling at my mother. Together we built a life, a home, and raised children who make us proud. His gaze drifted to Gabriel. Our son, the doctor, following in the footsteps of the greatest minds in medicine, soon to make us grandparents and continue our family legacy. I waited for some mention of me, some acknowledgement of my existence as their daughter. It never came. He finished his toast with more praise for my mother and sat down to appreciative murmurs from the assembled family. The slight was so expected that I should have been immune to the pain, but something about the public erasure stung more sharply than usual. I took a long sip of wine and focused on cutting my chicken into perfectly even pieces. As the main course progressed, my mother directed questions around the table, orchestrating the conversation like a conductor. When she finally turned her attention to me, her smile did not reach her eyes. "Geraldine, tell everyone about your job. Are you still with that small company, or have you found something more established?" The wording was deliberate. Small company. Not more successful or better, but more established, implying my current position was temporary, insignificant. Actually, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I was promoted to senior design director last month. My team just won a national advertising award for our campaign with the American Heart Association. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope for approval, for some acknowledgement of this legitimate achievement. That's nice, my mother said, her tone dismissive, but is there opportunity for advancement? What is the next step toward a real career? The familiar pain bloomed in my chest. A real career, as if the decade I had spent building my professional reputation was just a hobby, a placeholder, until I came to my senses. Design is my real career, I said more firmly than I intended. I am very successful at it. My father set down his fork with a sharp clink against the china. Successful is a relative term, Geraldine. Your brother is saving lives with his research. That is meaningful work. I felt heat rising in my face, but forced myself to remain calm. Different work can be meaningful in different ways. The heart disease awareness campaign we created is projected to encourage thousands of women to get preventative screenings. My Aunt Claudia, perhaps sensing the tension, attempted to change the subject. Speaking of successful careers, our Antonio just received 2 job offers from top law firms, full benefits, 6-figure starting salary. She beamed at her son, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. That is the kind of stability parents hope for, my mother added pointedly. Security, respect, a clear path forward. I tried another approach. The creative industry has changed so much. Did you know that major corporations now value design thinking as a core business strategy? Apple has proven that design drives profit and innovation. My father waved his hand dismissively. Companies will always need doctors, lawyers, engineers. These artistic trends come and go. I felt the conversation slipping away from me, my professional identity being diminished with each exchange. I searched for another neutral topic. The food is delicious, Mom. You outdid yourself with the chile rellenos. But my mother was not ready to release her grip on the previous subject. I ran into Sofia Martinez last week, she said, referring to a childhood friend of mine. Her daughter is your age, just finished her residency, pediatric neurology, married a doctor too. The implied comparison hung in the air. I nodded and took another bite of food that now tasted like cardboard. My Uncle Miguel leaned forward. You know, my friend has a son about your age. Very handsome, very successful. An architect. I could introduce you. Before I could respond, my mother jumped in. That would be wonderful. Geraldine needs to think about settling down soon. 32 is not young anymore. The conversation about my romantic prospects continued around me as if I were not present. My aunts and uncles offered suggestions about eligible men in their social circles, my mother lamenting my pickiness and unconventional priorities. I felt myself shrinking in my chair, becoming smaller and less visible with each passing minute. When Gabriel attempted to steer the conversation toward safer ground by asking about my recent trip to California for work, my father interrupted. What Geraldine needs is to move back to Arizona. Family is everything. All this moving around, chasing trends in New York, for what? To design advertisements that nobody remembers a week later? The dismissal of my entire life's work hit hard, but I maintained my composure. I have built a life I love in New York. My work is challenging and fulfilling. My father shook his head. Fulfilling is raising a family, building something that lasts, not these temporary projects. Carlos, my Aunt Teresa interjected gently, everyone finds fulfillment differently. No, my father insisted, his voice rising slightly. Some choices are objectively better than others. Some paths lead to real contribution. Others are just self-indulgence. The table fell uncomfortably silent. I stared at my plate, willing myself not to cry, not to show how deeply his words cut. My mother, perhaps sensing the tension had risen too high, attempted to smooth things over. What your father means is that we want security for you. We sacrificed everything to give you opportunities, and sometimes we worry that you are wasting your potential. Wasting your potential. The phrase that had haunted me since childhood. The subtle knife that had been twisted in my heart for decades. I am not wasting anything, I said quietly. I am using my talents in ways that matter to me. My father pushed his chair back slightly, a gesture I recognized from childhood as a warning sign of his frustration. If you had become a doctor like we hoped, like your brother, you would understand what real impact looks like. Sometimes I think we focus too much on Gabriel and not enough on correcting your path. The room seemed to still. My mother placed a hand on his arm, but he continued, his voice tight with decades of disappointment. Sometimes we wish you were never born. Then we would not have to see so much potential thrown away. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock across the table. My cousin Sophia gasped audibly. My Aunt Teresa put her hand to her mouth. Mariah, Gabriel's wife, looked down at her pregnant belly as if to shield her unborn child from such cruelty. Time seemed to stop. In that frozen moment, I saw with perfect clarity the pattern that had defined my life, the conditional love that had never been love at all. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that comes when a long-feared disaster finally occurs, and there is nothing left to dread. I placed my napkin carefully on the table and stood, my chair scraping loudly in the silence. When I spoke, my voice was steady, clear, and carried to every corner of the hushed room. Perfect. Then you will not need me when you are old. The silence deepened. My father's face registered shock, then anger. My mother paled, her hand clutching at the necklace she always wore. Around the table, relatives sat motionless, witnessing the family fracture that had been decades in the making. No one moved. No one spoke. The entire party remained frozen in the aftermath of words that could never be taken back. The silence hung heavy for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. My father recovered first, his face flushing with anger. How dare you speak to us this way after everything we have done for you? This disrespect, in our home, at our anniversary celebration. My mother reached for damage control, her social instincts kicking in. Geraldine did not mean it. Everyone, you know how sensitive she has always been. Carlos was just joking earlier, of course just joking. The familiar minimization of cruelty, repackaged as humor after the damage was done. No, I said, still standing. He was not joking, and neither was I. The room remained uncomfortably silent. Silverware frozen mid-air, wine glasses suspended between table and lips. My extended family had become an unwilling audience to the collapse of our carefully maintained facade. To my surprise, Gabriel stood up next. Dad, what you said was completely out of line. You cannot tell your own daughter you wish she was never born and expect her to just take it. My mother gasped at this unexpected betrayal from her golden child. Gabriel, please. This is not the time or place. When is the time, Mom? Gabriel challenged. You and Dad have been dismissing Geraldine for years. I have watched it happen and said nothing. That ends tonight. My Aunt Teresa stood next, her voice gentle but firm. Carlos, Lucia, I think we should all take a moment to calm down. Family disagreements happen, but some words cannot be unsaid. My father, unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by Gabriel, stared in disbelief. This is between us and our daughter. The rest of you should stay out of it. I felt a strange detachment, as if watching the scene unfold from above. Years of therapy had prepared me for this moment in ways I had not realized until now. I picked up my purse from the back of my chair. Thank you all for coming to celebrate my parents' anniversary. I think it is best if I leave now. My mother rose quickly, panic in her eyes at the public spectacle unfolding. Geraldine, do not be dramatic. Sit down and finish your dinner. We can discuss this later. There is nothing to discuss, I said calmly. Dad finally said out loud what I have felt my entire life. At least now we have honesty between us. I walked around the table past the frozen faces of relatives who had witnessed my parents' true feelings laid bare. No one tried to stop me. At the dining room doorway, I turned back briefly, making eye contact with Gabriel, who gave me a small nod of support. Outside, the desert night air hit my face, cool and clarifying. I walked to my rental car with steady steps, my hands surprisingly calm as I unlocked the door. It was only after I had driven 2 blocks that the first tears came, blurring the road ahead. I pulled into an empty church parking lot, turned off the engine, and finally allowed the full force of emotion to wash over me. 32 years of trying to earn love that should have been freely given. 32 years of measuring myself against impossible standards. 32 years of never being enough. But beneath the pain was something unexpected, relief. The pretense was over. The worst thing I had feared my entire life had finally happened, and I had survived it. More than survived. I had stood my ground. As I sat in the darkened car, my phone began buzzing with text messages. The first was from my cousin Antonio. What your dad said was horrible. You did not deserve that. Then my Aunt Teresa. I am so sorry, Carita. Call me if you need to talk. 3 missed calls from my mother, but no voicemail. And then, most surprisingly, from Gabriel. "Can I come see you? Where are you staying?" I texted him the name of my hotel, not sure if I wanted company, but touched by his unexpected alliance. Within an hour, there was a knock at my hotel room door. Gabriel stood there, tie loosened, looking more distressed than I had seen him in years. "I should have said something years ago," were his first words as he entered the room. "I watched them chip away at you bit by bit, and I said nothing because it was easier for me when their focus was on what you were doing wrong." We talked until past midnight, unraveling the complex dynamics that had shaped our relationship. Gabriel confessed that his perfect compliance had been its own prison, that he had pursued medicine partly out of genuine interest, but mostly out of fear of disappointing our parents. "The difference between us," he said, "is that you had the courage to follow your own path despite the cost. I never did." As the night grew late, he asked the question I had been asking myself since walking out of the dinner party. "What happens now?" "I do not know," I answered honestly, "but for the first time it feels like my decision to make." When Gabriel left, promising to check in the next day, I felt the strange mixture of grief and liberation more strongly than ever. Something had broken beyond repair at that dinner table, but something else, something vital within me, had finally been set free. That night, alone in the quiet hotel room, I slept more peacefully than I had in years. The first week after returning to New York passed in a blur of emotional processing. I called in sick to work for 2 days, something I had never done before, allowing myself time to sit with the enormity of what had happened. My phone showed a dozen missed calls from my mother, but not one from my father. I could not bring myself to listen to her voicemails yet. Jennifer noticed my distraction when I returned to work and invited me for an after-hours talk in her office. I found myself telling her everything, the words pouring out in a torrent I could not control. Instead of the awkward sympathy I expected, she shared her own story of family estrangement. "Family is not always who you are born to," she told me, pouring us both a small glass of whiskey from her desk drawer. "Sometimes family is who you choose, who sees your worth without requiring you to prove it constantly." Her words stayed with me as I navigated the strange new terrain of being honest about my family dynamics. For years, I had maintained the fiction of a supportive, albeit strict family. Now, I began speaking my truth, first with my closest friends, then my therapist, gradually widening the circle of people who knew the real story. "You are allowed to limit contact with people who hurt you, even if they are your parents," Dr. Richardson reminded me during an intense therapy session. "That is not selfish or ungrateful, it is self-preservation." By the third week, I still had not directly spoken to either of my parents, though I had finally listened to my mother's voicemails. They followed a predictable pattern. Initial demands that I apologize for making a scene, followed by attempts to minimize what had happened, concluding with guilt about how much my behavior had ruined their special day. Not once did she acknowledge or apologize for my father's cruel words. Gabriel called regularly, becoming an unexpected source of support. He reported that our parents were telling relatives I had overreacted to a small joke, painting themselves as the victims of my sensitivity. "They truly do not see it," he said, sounding bewildered. "They honestly believe they have done nothing wrong." At 1 month post-dinner, I made a decision that surprised even me. I deleted my parents' contact information from my phone, not blocking them, simply removing the stored numbers, so I would not feel the compulsion to call during moments of weakness. It was a small act of liberation that felt enormously significant. Professionally, something unexpected began happening. Without the constant background anxiety of seeking parental approval, I found myself taking more creative risks, speaking up more confidently in meetings, and pursuing projects I found meaningful rather than those that would sound impressive when described to critical ears. Jennifer noticed the change immediately. "Whatever personal battle you are fighting, it is making you a stronger designer. Your work has always been technically excellent, but now it has heart." I began building what Jennifer had called a chosen family, deepening connections with friends who valued me for exactly who I was. Sunday dinners at my apartment became a tradition, filling my home with laughter and genuine affection. My friend Zoe, a photographer who had also escaped a toxic family, became especially close, offering the sisterly relationship I had never had. The carefully constructed wall between my personal pain and professional persona began to dissolve. I gave a presentation at a design conference about finding authentic voice in creative work, weaving in elements of my own journey without explicitly mentioning my family. The response was overwhelming, with attendees lining up afterward to share similar stories. "You put words to something I have felt my entire career," one young designer told me, tears in her eyes. Nearly 3 months after the dinner incident, Gabriel called with news that changed everything. "Dad had a minor heart attack yesterday. He is stable, but Mom is insisting you need to come home immediately." The old me would have been on the first flight, desperate to prove my worth through dutiful daughter behavior. Instead, I asked measured questions about his prognosis. Good. Whether Gabriel was there, yes. And if there was any immediate danger, no. "Tell Mom I am glad he is doing better," I said finally. "I will send a card." Gabriel's silence spoke volumes. We both knew this represented a seismic shift in family dynamics. I was no longer automatically available at the first hint of crisis or guilt. The next day, my mother called from a number I did not recognize. I answered without realizing who it was. "How can you be so selfish?" she began without preamble. "Your father is in the hospital and you send a card. What kind of daughter are you?" The familiar guilt rose in my throat, but something new rose alongside it: resolve. "Mom, I am sorry Dad is unwell, but I'm not coming to Arizona to be blamed and criticized while pretending to help. That pattern is over." "Pattern? What pattern? We have given you everything, and this is how you repay us? By abandoning your father when he needs you? He has excellent medical care, and he has you and Gabriel. He does not need someone he wishes had never been born." Her sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. "He did not mean that. You know how your father speaks sometimes without thinking." "He meant it, Mom. And the problem is not that he said it. The problem is that you both have shown me that conditional love is all you have to offer. I deserve more than that." After we hung up, I expected to feel guilty or anxious. Instead, I felt clear and certain. For the first time, I had stated my truth without apology or qualification. 6 months after the dinner, I received a formal invitation to Gabriel's baby shower. Included was a handwritten note from him. "Maria and I want you here, but understand if it is too difficult. Parents will attend the main event, but have agreed to a separate celebration with you the day before if you prefer." The fact that my brother had negotiated this arrangement, acknowledging the reality of our family dysfunction, instead of pressuring me to pretend all was well, moved me deeply. I decided to attend the separate celebration, a decision that felt like choosing myself while still maintaining connections that mattered. That small victory led to others. I began setting clear boundaries in all areas of my life. From work projects I would no longer accept to dating relationships where I noticed unhealthy patterns. I stopped apologizing for my success, my choices, my very existence. Nearly 9 months after the dinner, my father called. I almost did not answer, but curiosity won out. "Geraldine," he said, his voice sounding older than I remembered, "your mother thinks I should speak with you." Not an apology, not even an acknowledgement that anything needed addressing. Still, it was the first direct contact he had initiated. "I am listening," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "The things said at the dinner, I was frustrated. You have always been so stubborn, so determined to do things your way." I waited, giving him space to continue or apologize. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Gabriel says you are doing well in New York," he finally offered, changing the subject entirely. "I am," I confirmed, not elaborating. Another long pause. "Your mother would like you to visit for Christmas." "I am not ready for that," I said honestly, "but thank you for calling, Dad." It was a brief, awkward conversation that resolved nothing, but it represented a tiny shift. He had reached out, however inadequately. I had maintained my boundaries without anger. It was a beginning, not of reconciliation exactly, but of acknowledgement that the relationship had fundamentally changed. By the 1-year anniversary of the dinner incident, I had established a new life rhythm that prioritized my well-being. I spoke with Gabriel weekly, exchanged occasional brief emails with my mother, and had had 2 more short, stilted phone conversations with my father. When I finally agreed to a video call with both parents to meet Gabriel's new baby, my therapist helped me prepare. "Remember, you are not responsible for their emotions or reactions. You can end the call if it becomes unhealthy." The call was tense but civil. My parents cooed over the baby while I watched, from the emotional distance I had established for my protection. When my mother made a pointed comment about how being a grandmother was the greatest joy in life, I simply smiled and changed the subject rather than taking the bait. It was during this period that I received the most unexpected validation of my professional life, a nomination for Designer of the Year from a prestigious industry organization. The award ceremony would be held in Los Angeles, and nominees were encouraged to bring family members to the gala dinner. After much consideration, I invited Jennifer, Zoe, and two other close friends who had supported me through the past year, my chosen family. I did not invite my parents, a decision that felt not like revenge, but like self-care. The night I won the award, standing on stage, looking out at the tables filled with industry colleagues and my chosen family cheering loudly from the front row, I felt a completion of some crucial circle. The validation I had spent decades seeking from my parents had come instead from my own dedication and the community I had built around me. I no longer needed my parents to see my worth to believe in it myself. 1 year and 3 months after the family dinner that changed everything, I found myself sitting across from my parents at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant halfway between the airport and their home. I had finally agreed to a brief visit with conditions carefully established in advance. No criticism of my career, no comments about my personal life choices, and most importantly, an acknowledgement of the hurt caused at the anniversary dinner. My father, looking notably older than when I had last seen him in person, cleared his throat awkwardly as our appetizers arrived. "Your mother and I have been talking, with help from Gabriel and our priest." He paused, clearly struggling with the unfamiliar territory of apologizing. "What I said at the dinner was wrong. I should never have said we wished you were never born." It was not a complete apology, more a retraction of a specific statement than an acknowledgement of the lifetime of conditional love that had preceded it. Still, it was more than I had expected. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. My mother reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand when she saw me tense. "We do not understand your choices sometimes, Geraldine, but you are our daughter. Of course we want you in this world." The conversation that followed was strained, but represented a shift. They asked questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. I shared condensed versions of my professional accomplishments without seeking their approval or validation. When my mother began a sentence with, "Have you considered?" my father actually interrupted her with a quiet, "Lucia, remember what we discussed?" It was evident they were trying, in their limited way, to establish a new relationship dynamic. I recognized that this represented significant effort on their part, even if it fell short of the deep understanding I might have wished for in an ideal world. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, my father asked the question that revealed how far we still had to go. "So everything can go back to normal now? You will visit more often?" "Dad," I said gently, "we are creating a new normal. I will visit occasionally, but my life is in New York, and I need you both to continue respecting the boundaries we have discussed." His face showed disappointment, but not the anger I would have expected in the past. Progress, however incremental, was still progress. In the months that followed, I maintained limited but civil contact with my parents. Christmas cards, occasional phone calls, brief visits once or twice a year. The relationship would never be what societal norms suggested it should be, but it had evolved into something honest. My mother still occasionally slipped into her old patterns, making comments about my biological clock or comparing my life choices unfavorably to more traditional paths. But now, instead of internalizing these comments as evidence of my inadequacy, I could see them as reflections of her own limitations and fears. "Your parents may never fully change," Dr. Richardson reminded me during a maintenance therapy session. "The question is whether you can accept that reality while protecting your own well-being." I was learning that resolution did not always mean perfect reconciliation. Sometimes it meant accepting the limitations of relationships while no longer allowing those limitations to define your self-worth. My professional life continued to flourish. The award had opened new doors, bringing opportunities to work on campaigns with greater social impact, the area where I found the most fulfillment. I began mentoring younger designers, particularly those from immigrant families struggling with cultural expectations that conflicted with their creative ambitions. One young woman, Lucia, tearfully confided during a mentoring session that her parents had threatened to cut off contact if she pursued design instead of business. How did you find the courage to disappoint your family? She asked. I realized that living a life to please others meant never truly living at all, I told her. The pain of their disappointment is real, but the pain of abandoning yourself is far greater and lasts much longer. Personally, I had begun a relationship with Michael, a kind and thoughtful architect who had his own history of complicated family dynamics. He understood my boundaries around holiday visits and never pressured me to force a closer relationship with my parents than I was comfortable maintaining. Family is who treats you like family, he said once, echoing Jennifer's wisdom from years before. 2 years after the dinner incident, Gabrielle and Mariah invited me to be godmother to their second child. The ceremony would mean another family gathering, another opportunity for old wounds to be reopened. But it would also be a chance to solidify the new relationships I had been building, particularly with my brother. Mom and Dad know this is your decision, Gabriel assured me, and they have promised to respect whatever boundaries you set. I agreed to attend, setting clear expectations about my participation. The baptism itself was surprisingly peaceful. My parents, perhaps aware they were being observed by extended family who remembered the anniversary dinner debacle, maintained polite, even warm interactions. My mother actually complimented the dress I wore without adding any qualifiers or suggestions for improvement. At the reception, my father approached me while I was alone, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Your brother tells me your company won some major accounts recently. Yes, I confirmed, bracing for the inevitable criticism or comparison. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. He showed me your work on his computer, the campaign for the Children's Hospital. It was very good, very professional. Coming from my father, this simple acknowledgement without qualification was equivalent to effusive praise from anyone else. Thank you, Dad, I said, genuinely touched by the effort this represented for him. We stood in awkward silence for a moment before he spoke again. I may not understand your world, Geraldine, but I can see you have built something significant. It was not a declaration of unconditional love or a complete reversal of decades of criticism, but it was recognition, however small, of my value on my own terms rather than his. In that moment, I realized I no longer needed more than this from him. I had found my worth elsewhere, in the life I had created, the work I produced, the relationships I had cultivated. 3 years after standing up at that dinner table, I had built a life rich with meaning and connection. The wound of that night had scarred over, no longer raw and painful, just a reminder of how far I had come. I had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to stop trying to earn love that should have been freely given and instead build a life filled with people who love you for exactly who you are. The journey from that dining room to this place of peace had not been linear or simple. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, days when the old patterns of seeking approval threatened to reassert themselves. But with each small victory, each boundary maintained, each authentic choice made, I had moved further away from the person who had spent decades shrinking herself to fit into someone else's expectations. Family, I had learned, is not defined by DNA or obligation. Family is a circle of love and acceptance, sometimes including those we are born to, sometimes created from the connections we forge throughout our lives. The table I now gathered around might look different from the one I had left that night, but it was set with genuine affection rather than conditions and criticism. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to diminish your choices? How did you find the courage to speak your truth? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve unconditional love just as they are. Thank you for listening to my journey, from seeking approval to finding my authentic voice. Remember, sometimes the most powerful words you can say are simply, I deserve better.